ever walked into a room and forgotten why you were there? Or have you ever read the same paragraph three different times because it just didn't stick in your brain? Have you ever forgotten someone's name that you know really well? Or have you ever lost your train of thought in the middle of a sentence? Have you looked at a project you knew you could handle a year ago and thought, why can't I do this anymore? What is wrong with me? And you wonder, am I just getting older? Is this the start of dementia? Is something wrong with my brain? Am I losing my edge? Well, I have good news for you today. If you're experiencing these things, it probably or may not be permanent. It may simply be burnout. So welcome, I'm Coach Lysa, and this is Unshakeable Uplift, and we're doing a few episodes on burnout, and today's topic is burnout and brain fog. What's happening to my mind? And we've been talking about different aspects of burnout, how we got here, the 5 steps into severe burnout. And last week, we talked about the mindset, the belief system, and the thought process behind burnout. And today we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the organ in our brain that produces the thoughts. Because burnout doesn't just affect your body and your emotion, it literally affects your brain. It affects the physiology. And so when we talk about our brains have one primary responsibility, and that is to keep us alive. So every 4 seconds, particularly for women and moms, every 4 seconds, our brain is scanning the horizon asking, am I safe? And when stress is low, your body responds quickly and rebounds and resets, and you're good to go again. But burnout isn't short-term stress. It's long-term, chronic, recurring over and over and over stress. And eventually your brain changes its priorities. It goes from asking, how can I help her thrive, to what do we need to do to survive? What do we need to do to get through the next 5 minutes? And that's when your capacity for life starts shrinking. And so there's this little piece of your brain called the amygdala, and that's built to sound the alarm. And when that amygdala gets stressed and flies open, it stays open and you stay stressed. And long term, that's what leads you into adrenal fatigue. Okay, and then there's this other thing called the hippocampus that is responsible for memory, short-term and long-term memory. And when the amygdala has been sounding the alarm for months, not minutes, the hippocampus shuts down, and that's part of why your memory gets impacted. So you're not less intelligent, you're not lazy, you don't feel like you're getting as much done, but there's a physiological root cause. You're not lazy. You haven't lost your mind. You haven't lost your abilities. Your brain shifted into conservation mode. So think about your phone or your smartwatch. They have low power modes. And when your battery starts dropping down to a lower percentage, our phones and our watches start shutting off features. Not because it's broken, it's just trying to preserve itself and stay alive. And so burnout does something similar in humans. Your brain temporarily reduces energy devoted to creativity, focus, problem solving, decision making, and memory to keep the rest of you alive and going. And over the last few episodes, I've shared some of my personal story. So a year ago, July, I got laid off from my corporate job, and I had been in the corporate world for 40 years. And I immediately thought, oh, a couple weeks and I'll bounce back. I was taking 3-hour naps every afternoon, just exhausted. Again, brain was not functioning. And so one of the things that I noticed in my own life that I hadn't yet identified as burnout was my ability to stay organized had diminished. And so as a program and project manager, organization was crucial. It was essential. And so I found that I was filing things in the wrong folders, and then I'd go back and look for them later and couldn't find them. And over again, I would go, what was I thinking when I put this here? And so then it got to where I couldn't remember what I had named files. And so I was even having a hard time doing a search on them to find them. And so it didn't break anything, but it took extra time. It took extra effort. It took extra energy. And sometimes I was with someone else and couldn't find these files, and it actually got a little bit embarrassing. And so there were times that I wondered if I was losing all my marbles. I knew that I should be able to keep track of all of this stuff. It's not hard, but I did work in an interrupt-driven environment. And so some of it I just attributed to distraction. It's like, oh, well, I was talking to them and I was trying to multitask and I wasn't paying attention. But it just continued. And it wasn't happening all the times, but I did notice it was worse on the days when I didn't sleep well. And so you can kind of do some cause and effect there. But that didn't used to be the case. Even 3 years ago, if I had a bad night's sleep, I could still function pretty well. And so for me, it wasn't the big things. It wasn't the, major decisions or the things that really truly were crucial in life that mattered. They were significant enough to pay attention to. It was the small day-to-day things that should have been easy that became huge chores. And again, I mentioned last week, I don't like unloading the dishwasher to start with, and I can't even tell you why. But in burnout, that 3 or 4 minute task felt like it was going to take an hour. It felt like it was just overwhelming. Something as silly and as simple as unloading the dishwasher. Another thing is I have really thick hair. And so taking a shower and blow drying my hair. Blow drying my hair felt like this major chore. Keeping the books for my business, just doing those simple accounting entries. My brain would scramble and it just felt fuzzy. There wasn't the energy to focus on these things. And so what happens is you do the things that are easy, but anything that takes a decision, anything that requires you to think or focus, get put off. And so then that procrastination happens. And when procrastination happens, the stress level goes up and you get right back into this vicious circle. And so again, at this point, I had zero idea that I was in burnout. I was still functioning on a fairly high level, working my day job, working my side hustle. Looking back, my body was screaming at me to pay attention, but I was absolutely deaf to what it was saying. As I said before, burnout was nowhere on my radar. I ran yellow lights, I ran red lights, and I totally ignored the police car that was behind me trying to chase me down. I just didn't get it until I hit that point when I got laid off and I had time to pause and rest, and things just kind of crumbled. And so emotionally, what burnout does to you is it can suck your self-confidence right out of the picture. Emotionally, it's hard. You feel like you're not yourself. It's like, if I'm not myself, who am I? And we had an older loved one who truly went into dementia and Alzheimer's. And watching her process through that journey was really, really difficult. For a period of time, she knew she was losing things, losing her mind, and she couldn't do anything about it. And I had a little bit of that same sense, and it kind of creates that almost momentary panic of, is this what's happening to me? And it wasn't, it's not, but it's like my brain would short circuit for a few seconds. It's like it would hiccup, or, if anybody that's old enough to have a record player, it skipped a couple of lanes. There's just this twitchy thing that happens occasionally, and it's fleeting, it's momentary, but your logic gets disrupted. And so in a professional job, this is the stuff that generates genuine fear and adds to imposter syndrome, which I already had. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this low power mode. Low power mode explains why you have less energy. Everything doesn't become harder. Your mental bandwidth becomes smaller. So instead of having a 10-lane highway, you're now on a 2-lane road. But the same amount of traffic trying to flow through that 2-lane road feels overwhelming. And so it's things like choosing dinner. It's things like returning emails. They just feel huge, is the word I use. Remembering appointments. You have to write everything down a couple of times, a couple of places, and make sure that it's in your phone. Learning new things. So like right now, I'm doing Duolingo and I'm learning Italian. A year and a half ago, I simply could not have done that. It just would not have worked. It would not have stuck in my brain. And there are still days when I have a challenge going back and remembering, but at least I know I am able to learn. Another thing that can be challenging is following conversations. Again, in a professional world, when you're in meetings and there's 5 different people talking and you're the one tracking them, it can get a little bit difficult. And so I kind of want to humorously talk about the decision about choosing dinner. And have you seen that meme on Facebook where it's a husband and a wife, and it says that marriage is really just 2 people asking each other, what do you want for dinner for the rest of your life? That's kind of how my husband and I are. We've been empty nesters for a while. And it's like, I don't mind fixing dinner. I don't want to choose what it is. Just tell me what you want and I'll go prepare it. And so my version of burnout, that decision fatigue, was picking dinner. How silly is that? And most of the time my husband would say, well, what do you think about such and such? And that's what we'd run with, and it was fine. But there were occasionally those days when he was also tired or burned out, and neither of us could pick. And so we have a couple of standby defaults that we ended up going to. Um, you know, the nutrition might have been questionable, but at least nobody starved. And so kind of coming back to burnout, many people begin to wonder, am I getting Alzheimer's? Is this dementia? Am I just getting older and this is the new normal? And for most of us, that's not the truth. None of those are the answer. It's just an exhausted brain. And so think about when you're lifting weights or when you're exercising, you go for muscle fatigue because it builds up the strength and it builds up the endurance. Our brains do not function that same way. When you tax your brain and tax your brain, and that continues for days, weeks, months, and even into years, and for me, a couple of decades probably, your brain just gets exhausted. And that doesn't mean that you ignore serious symptoms. Okay, burnout is a option of several. So don't be foolish and attribute everything to burnout. You do need to pay attention. But it does mean recognizing that burnout can mimic cognitive decline, and it deserves attention before assuming anything else. But underneath all of this, including the fear, there's something else running. There's an operating system, a belief system running in the background that is, I call, never enoughness. I should still be able to do this like I used to. A sharper version of me wouldn't be struggling right now. That voice isn't a diagnosis. It's the same never enoughness that we talked about in the last few episodes. And that's showing up in your mind instead of your calendar. And so this concept of never being enough is where we get into striving. It's the imposter syndrome. It's the always feeling like you have to prove yourself. You're not enough. What you do is never enough, and it's never going to be done. Again, go back to the book of Genesis. God worked for 6 days, created everything, and said, it's enough. And he took that 7th day and rested. We do not give ourselves permission to rest on that 7th day. We plow through 7 days a week, maybe 364 days a year. We might have a sick day where we truly aren't processing. But it's not an intentional rest. And it's not where we've given ourselves permission, because what we're doing is quality work, and rest doesn't have to be earned. Okay, another big key to all of this. And so burnout wants you to believe that this is just who you are now, but it's not. Burnout is something that's happening to your brain. It's not a verdict about your brain or your capabilities. You're not becoming forgetful. You're not becoming slow. You're not less capable. You're simply exhausted. And exhaustion isn't an identity, it's a chapter or a season. But burnout doesn't speak the same language to everyone. It finds the exact place that you've built your sense of self, and it whispers the lie right there. It knows what your trigger is. And so again, in my coaching and inner healing work, I talk about personality profiles, not as a definition of who you are, but it's clues, it's data points so that we can connect the dots. And so if we look at the DISC profile, which is probably the most familiar one to a lot of people, if you're a D, a driver, a doer, someone who finds identity in producing and winning, burnout doesn't just slow you down. It whispers, you're failing. And if you tend to be an I, someone who finds identity in connection and energy, burnout whispers to you, you're losing yourself. And if you're an S, which is what I am, someone who finds identity in being steady and dependable, burnout doesn't just tire you out. It tells you you're letting everyone else down. Even those people halfway around the world that don't know who you are, but should, you're letting them down too. And if you tend to be a C, that conscientious person who finds identity in precision and getting things right, burnout doesn't just fog your thinking. It whispers, you're about to be exposed as incompetent. That's a threat. Different voice, same lie. And so burnout doesn't just take your energy. It goes straight to your identity, the heart of who you are, your self-perception, and it knows which lie will land the hardest for you. However, recovery speaks a different language for each of the 4 personality styles also. So again, let's go back to our D, our driver person. Recovery doesn't mean doing less and calling it defeat. It means redefining winning. For this season, finishing the day with your peace intact is the win. And so we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about recovery for the other 3 personality styles. And then we're going to lay the foundation for the hope for the future. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Coach Lysa with Unshakeable Uplift, and here is today's Unshakable tip. Stop performing and start rooting. If you're exhausted, it may not be your schedule. It may be your performance mindset. When your identity is built on being impressive, you always feel like you're behind. You're constantly running to catch up. But Colossians says, let your roots grow deep in Him. Roots don't perform.
They anchor us. So today's tip is stop trying to impress the room. Stop trying to be overly impressive. Root your life in truth. And that's how you become unshakable.
And welcome back. We're talking about how recovery is different for each of the 4 personality styles on the DISC profile. And we talked about a D, a driver, means redefining what winning looks like. And so for the I, recovery doesn't mean pulling away from people to protect your image. It means letting the people close to you see the real, the tired, the fatigued version of you, instead of always saying, I'm fine, so that you don't lose your energy as the fun one. So a lot of this, again, is reframe and refocus, reframe and redefine. And so for the S, recovery doesn't mean abandoning the people that depend on you. It means trusting that saying, not right now, is still love, but it's love with a boundary on it. And that boundary protects you, keeps you able to function, which ultimately serves them better. And for our conscientious people, our C's, recovery doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means accepting that sometimes good enough for today is not the same as failing. And again, we always joke about with that not good enough. If you're doing brain surgery, you can't settle for good enough for today. But in the majority of things that we do, where we're the one pushing ourselves and driving ourselves crazy, good enough for today is an acceptable phrase. And if you have time to go back to it tomorrow and do more, do that. But sometimes we have to accept where we're at and what we can accomplish. And so here's the part I wish someone had told me at the bottom of those stairs. And again, the stairs I'm referencing to is the 5 steps that we climb into burnout. So step 5 is severe burnout, which is where I probably was. So at the bottom of the stairs, recovery is not a one-size-fits-all. Researchers have mapped these ranges by severity, and they line up with that staircase I talked about. And if you catch yourself at stage 2 or even stage 3, which is just that onset of stress or early chronic stress, recovery can happen in a few months or even a few weeks with real rest and real boundaries. But you can't keep doing what you've been doing and recover. But if you are like me and you got all the way to step 4 or step 5, full burnout, habitual burnout, the honest research says that you're looking at 6 months to 2 years. And I was absolutely shocked when I started doing my research and read that. And I thought, that won't be me. Again, few weeks, couple months, I'll be fine. Not so much. And for those of us who white knuckle it and push even beyond step 5 and we just keep going, my kind of joke was I was surviving on sheer willpower and muscle memory. It can take even longer. And so the more severe your burnout gets, which is typically driven by yourself, naturally, the longer it takes to recover. So again, when I first heard these numbers, I could not fathom it. A year felt like a life sentence. I wanted a timeline I could survive, not one that stretched past what I could see. And you don't know in this recovery journey how close to being recovered you are. There are signposts and symptoms along the way. And so as I pause and listen to my own body and my own subconscious, I feel like I'm probably about 80 to 85% recovered. I've come a long ways in a year, but there are still things I know should be different. And over time, even over the course of this summer, a few of those things have continued to improve. Okay. And so something else that the research says that I needed to hear is that healing isn't a straight climb. It comes in waves, good days, and harder days, both in the same week. Leaps and bounds forward and then slipping a little bit backwards, but it's still all forward progress. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong when you experience that. You're just being honest. And if you're 3 months into recovery and you're not back, that doesn't mean you're failing. It just means your process is taking time. Okay? Trust the process. It really does work. And the amazing part of all of this is that our brains are adaptable. As stress decreases, capacity returns, memory improves, focus comes back, creativity returns. One of the things that God told me to do as part of my recovery was to do fun things, creative things. So I'm creating things in Canva. I'm writing children's books for my granddaughters. I'm doing fun things that release those parts of the brain that brings the life back in. And so for the first 6 months, I still struggled with organization and keeping track of details, but that's continued to get better and better. And the times where I can't remember and can't recall are farther and farther apart. And so things that for years have been energetic hurdles for me, I'm able to do now. And things that I've wanted to do for literally 15 years, I'm now able to do. I can get up in the morning and journal and have some quiet time and have it be meaningful, and that ability to focus. And so I want to close out with just one example here. So in the Old Testament of the Bible, there was a prophet named Elijah. And Elijah had done this really amazing, huge thing. And afterwards, he collapsed. And he actually asked God to kill him. It's like, Lord, take me out, call me home. I'm done here. But of course, God didn't do that. He sent him out to a quiet place and told him to take a nap. He had some birds bring him bread to eat, and he gave him fresh water and just a little bit of a timeout and a break, and he was fine again. And so sometimes we're waiting for direction when God invites us into recovery and rest. And for me, this last year of rest has almost been harder than having too much to do. Apparently, I don't know how to rest. I am literally still learning what it means to physically rest, emotionally rest, and probably most important, spiritually rest. Because in my head, there's still this driving thing that says you should be doing. That's what God wants. But it's not what God wants. We have to give ourselves permission to rest and recover. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to give you 3 practical takeaways for this week's episode. And welcome back. So again, closing out this episode on what's happening to my brain. The three practical takeaways I want to give you this week are essential to your recovery. The first one is sleep. Sleep is not optional, and it is something many of us have to work on. And so there are supplements you can take to help you sleep. A lot of it is giving yourself permission to truly and deeply rest. Essential, necessary, required. The second one is margin. You cannot book your calendar from 6 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night and recover. You have to have white space, particularly for those of us who are S, I, or C's in the disc profile. That white space, having time to just be, having time to think. I actually schedule thinking time into my calendar. And then the last one is permission. Stop judging yourself by the capacity you had 5 years ago. Acknowledge and honor the capacity you have today. You can regain capacity if you will change things for a while and allow yourself to recover. And so this week's unshakable key is burnout does not erase your intelligence. It reduces your capacity. As healing comes, capacity returns. And so for reflection question for this week, I want you to ask yourself and journal, where have you been calling yourself weak when you were actually exhausted? It's self-judgment, it's self-criticism. And so hopefully today you realized I'm not broken, I'm just burned out. And if burnout created this, healing can restore it. There is hope. And next week, my guest is going to be Amy Zanders, and Amy's going to talk about nutrition and supplements that physically help our body recover, because nutrition and supplements are a critical element to recovery, along with the rest and the permission and the belief in yourself. So again, I'm Coach Lysa. This has been Unshakeable Uplift, where we help you be healed, uplifted, and become unshakable. I hope you join us next week. Thanks for listening today.
In a world that keeps on shaking, I'm standing on your truth. I spent years where